They laughed when Ellie Mae inherited her uncle's crumbling scrapyard, just acres of rusted metal, shattered windshields, and silence. Everyone said she'd sell it for pennies, maybe finally give up on that stubborn dream of hers. But hidden in the far corner, beneath a pile of twisted frames and weeds, she found something that shouldn't have been there. Something that would rewrite not just her future, but everything they thought they knew about her family's past. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories about grit, grace, and unexpected gold strike a chord with you, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode might just be even more unbelievable than this one. The sun hadn't even crested the ridge when Ellie Mae parked her old pickup just outside the gates of Miller Salvage. Morning light spilled lazily through the pine trees, casting long shadows across the rusting sea of metal that stretched out before her. The gate was still locked with the same rusted chain her uncle had wrapped around it a decade ago. She stepped out of the truck slowly, hands in her coat pockets, boots crunching on gravel that hadn't seen much foot traffic since before her high school graduation. To most folks in town, it was just a junkyard, a graveyard for cars and machines no one had the time or care to save. But to Ellie, it was something else entirely. It was where she used to sit, cross-legged, on the hood of a wrecked '73 Cutlass, while her Uncle Reggie welded sheet metal with a cigarette dangling from his mouth. It was where she first held a wrench, where she learned the language of bolts and belts and busted alternators. And now, somehow, it was hers. She reached for the key that still hung from the leather loop on her belt, the one Reggie had given her on her 17th birthday, back when he still called her kid and thought the world had space for dreamers like them. The padlock clicked open slower than it used to. The gate groaned as she pushed it wide. Inside, it smelled the same metal dust, motor oil, a hint of pine needles. Time had settled over the place like a second skin. Vines curled through hubcaps, saplings burst from hollow fenders, and a family of sparrows had made a home inside what was left of an old delivery van. Still, beneath the rot, the bones were there. Racks of parts still stood like rusted soldiers. Engines stacked in crooked pyramids. A line of cars half dismantled, but not yet forgotten. Ellie walked slow, her boots dragging a trail in the gravel, eyes scanning every row like they were shelves in an old library. Reggie had once told her that every car on the lot had a story, and if she was patient enough, they'd talk. She paused in front of an old two-door Jeep with no tires and a shattered windshield. She reached out and touched the hood gently, fingertips resting on the flaking paint. "Still here, huh?" she whispered. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime rattled not from a porch, but from a string of bent wrenches hanging from a power line tower, her uncle's handiwork. His idea of a joke. Yard music, he used to call it. She smiled. It was the first time she had since the reading of the will. She wandered deeper, past the trailer office that sagged on its foundation, past the row of classic cars he'd once sworn he'd restore. One day, it was quiet. Still, except for the soft creak of rusted sheet metal shifting in the wind. This place wasn't just dead weight, like people said. It was a time capsule, a forgotten chapter. And if there was one thing Ellie Mae had learned from years of being underestimated, it was that sometimes what's buried beneath the dirt and dust still has fire left in it. And maybe, just maybe, so did she. Ellie spent the better part of the morning wandering the rows, reacquainting herself with the layout. Some of the vehicles she remembered. The old fire truck, with one red door and one white. The sky-blue Thunderbird that had no engine but somehow still had its fuzzy dice hanging from the mirror. But a lot had changed, too. Trees had grown in strange places. Some of the paths were overgrown completely, swallowed by tall grass and time. She kicked aside cans and broken glass as she moved, making a slow loop toward the back where the fence dipped, and the ground sloped unevenly toward the creek. Her uncle used to call it the boneyard's edge. He always told her to stay out of that far corner, said it wasn't safe, said the cars stacked back there were unstable, half-buried, or worse. As a kid, she listened. But now, standing on land that was legally hers and emotionally unfinished, Ellie didn't see danger, she saw mystery. The fence at the far edge had collapsed in on itself like tired lungs. Behind it, thick brush tangled around the skeletons of machines long forgotten, their metal frames twisted and sinking into the earth. Trees had wrapped themselves around old bumpers, vines curled like veins through shattered grills. She could see the nose of something massive, poking from beneath a collapsed tarp or what was left of one, its canvas bleached and shredded by years of rain and Sunday. She climbed over a pile of scrap carefully, her boots skidding on loose sheet metal. A startled possum darted from under a fender and vanished into the brush. Ellie didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on the shape ahead, drawn by something she couldn't explain. It wasn't just curiosity. It was instinct. Up close, the shape was more than just a car. It was larger, broader, and sealed like a capsule. Metal plates along the side curved in a way she didn't recognize. Not military exactly, not civilian either. The chassis was smoothed over in places, like it had been intentionally designed for airflow, not aesthetics. The front end jutted slightly, broken open just enough to expose internal compartments. There were no markings, no license plate, no VIN, except one. She brushed aside a sheet of moss and rust, and found a small engraved nameplate, nearly hidden in a recessed panel. Her breath caught. Mae Project Echo Hawk 3, her uncle's initials. Ellie stared at the lettering, fingers frozen above the plate. It didn't make sense. Reggie was a mechanic, not a designer, and he never once mentioned a project, certainly not something like this. This wasn't a car. At least, not any kind of car she'd ever seen. Suddenly the quiet felt heavy. Not peaceful, but expectant. Like the whole scrapyard had been waiting for her to find this exact moment. She stepped back, heart beating harder than it had in months, maybe years. This wasn't junk. It was a secret. The metal was cold beneath her fingers, even with the sun rising. Ellie ran her thumb across the etched nameplate again, as if the letters might shift, vanish, prove she'd imagined them. But they stayed. Mae Project. Echo Hawk 3, not painted, not stenciled. Etched deep and clean, the kind of lettering done with purpose, not convenience. She stepped back and took in the full shape again. It wasn't a car. That much was obvious now. The proportions were wrong. The undercarriage was sealed. The paneling wasn't just bent sheet metal, it was fabricated with curves and welds she couldn't place. Experimental? Aerodynamic? Something military? Her stomach turned in quiet awe. Whatever it was, it didn't belong in a scrapyard, and it sure as hell wasn't the kind of thing her uncle should have been able to build. She reached for her phone, thought about taking pictures, but stopped herself. Not yet. It didn't feel right. She hadn't even opened the thing. A nearby toolbox, rusted and left open, sat under the edge of a collapsed workbench. Ellie knelt down, pulled it free, and fumbled through sockets, wrenches, and crumpled gloves, until she found what she needed. The 1/4-inch socket still had oil on it, thick and black, but she didn't care. She approached the panel carefully, positioned the tool over the first bolt, and with both hands, started to turn. It screamed in protest, but moved. One by one, she worked the bolts free until the access panel loosened with a soft pop. Dust burst out in a thin cloud. She stepped back, waving it away, eyes burning slightly. Inside, she expected to find wires, maybe rusted electronics. What she saw instead made her breath catch. Glass tubes, cylindrical, black wiring wrapped in spiral mesh, a steel tank labeled pressurized, with a warning in faded red letters. Use caution during atmospheric adjustment. None of it made sense. She'd worked on cars, trucks, even an old snowcat once. But this? This was something else. This was engineered, not for the road, but maybe the sky. She sat down on a low bumper nearby, hands in her lap, trying to steady the buzz in her chest. Reggie had always said he was just a grease monkey, that he fixed what was broken but didn't make things from scratch. But Ellie was starting to wonder how much of that was true. Had he been hiding this? Protecting it? Why? And why here, under vines, under scrap, like it had been buried? She stood and ran her hand along the body once more. It wasn't smooth. There were dents, impact points, Signs of a hard landing, or at least a rough move. Her fingers caught on a series of deep scratches near the rear plate slashes that looked almost deliberate, like something or someone had tried to erase part of it. But they hadn't gotten to the nameplate. M. Mae. And now she had a question burning too bright to ignore. What was her uncle really building? The trailer office hadn't changed since Ellie was a teenager. The same faded yellow siding, the same warped steps that creaked under her boots as she climbed them. The screen door stuck before it gave way with a jolt, sending a puff of dust into the stale air. Inside, it smelled like old oil and sun-baked paper. Reggie had never been one for decor. The walls were still lined with dog-eared service manuals, coil springs stacked like firewood in the corner, and a crooked clock that hadn't worked in years. She moved through the space slowly, eyes scanning every surface. The desk was still cluttered, drawers half opened, receipts curling at the edges. There was no computer, just a battered cash register and a rotary phone that probably hadn't rung in a decade. She opened the bottom drawer, finding a tangle of keys, bolts, and a small photo of her and Reggie at a local car show. She was maybe 16 in the picture, face smeared with axle grease, grinning with pride over a rebuilt flathead V8. He'd written, "My kiddo, future boss lady," in pen across the bottom. She stared at it a long time, her throat tightening. Then she noticed the back wall. A panel of plywood, painted to match the rest, but with a seam that didn't sit quite right. Ellie approached, ran her hand across it. It was loose, just slightly. Enough that when she pressed her palm to the upper left corner, it dipped in with a soft click, a hidden latch. The panel shifted. She pulled it open. Behind it, tucked inside a hollow in the wall, was a stack of envelopes, bound by a thick rubber band. Beside them sat a small leather notebook, cracked and worn, its edges dark with age. She pulled them out carefully, setting them on the desk as though they might dissolve, if handled too roughly. The notebook was Reggie's, his handwriting looped, in slow, deliberate print. Most of it looked like inventory at first. Part numbers, shipping dates, names, but the further she flipped, the more the entries changed. They became personal, paranoid even. Test flight failed. Structural compromise. Reinforced strut welds before any further lift. Someone came by again asking about parts I never listed. Same questions. Same eyes. I told them the Echo Hawk was scrapped. They didn't believe me. Echo Hawk. Her pulse quickened. She opened the first envelope. Inside was a letter on old stationery, addressed to M. Mae, Chief Fabrication Specialist, Phase 3. The signature at the bottom wasn't Reggie's. It was someone named C. Halbrook, Director of Operations, Phoenix Division. Ellie read the letter twice. It was full of language that felt lifted from a classified manual authorizations, compartmentalization, project milestones. There were mentions of alternative fuel integration, adaptive flight stabilizers, and a prototype registry labeled simply E3 amperes, and every line was dated between 1989 and 1992. None of this made sense. Reggie had never left the county, never flown a plane, never went to college. Yet here he was, addressed like a lead engineer on something that didn't belong to the world she knew. She sat back, the trailer suddenly too quiet. The wind rattled a loose gutter outside. Her uncle had been hiding more than a machine. He'd been hiding a past, and someone, at some point, had come looking for it. The knock came just after sundown. Ellie had been back in the trailer office, seated at the desk with Reggie's notebook open, a dozen letters fanned out beside her like a map of the impossible. The sun had dipped behind the trees, casting the yard into deep shadows. Crickets chirped outside, and the buzz of a distant transformer filled the silence. She hadn't locked the gate, a habit from childhood. She hadn't yet unlearned, but still, she hadn't expected anyone. Not this late. Not out here. 3 firm knocks on the metal screen door. Not rushed. Not timid either. She stood slowly, her body tense, her heart already rising. When she opened the door, a tall man stood just outside the porch light's reach. He wore a wide-brimmed canvas hat, the kind older farmers wore to block the sun, and a jacket too heavy for the warm air. His hands were in his pockets, his face shadowed. "Miss May?" he asked. His voice was steady, low, like it had been trained never to crack. "Yeah," she said. "That's me." He nodded once. "I worked with your uncle, long time ago." Ellie stepped out onto the porch, letting the screen door click shut behind her. "Funny. Reggie never mentioned you." The man smiled faintly. He didn't mention a lot. They stood there in the quiet yard, the glow from the trailer porch the only thing keeping the dark at bay. Ellie waited for him to explain himself. He didn't. "You got a name?" she asked. "Denton," he said. "Just Denton. What do you want, Denton?" He shifted slightly, glancing out at the scrapyard like he was checking for movement, though none came. "I heard Reggie passed," he said. "He was. One of the good ones. We didn't always agree, but I respected him." Ellie folded her arms. "So you dropped by after dark to pay your respects?" "No," he said. "I came to warn you." That stopped her. He took a breath, exhaled through his nose like someone about to say something he'd carried a long time. "If you found Echo Hawk, you need to stop digging." Her chest tightened. She said nothing. "I know it's out there," he continued. "I helped build part of it. Before it was shut down. Before your uncle took it and disappeared." "Disappeared?" Ellie echoed. Denton nodded. "Reggie didn't just walk away. He vanished. He ghosted everyone involved. Didn't answer calls. Didn't show up for the hearings. Next thing we heard, he'd bought a plot of land in Georgia and opened a junkyard. I figured he buried the damn thing. Turns out, I was right." She didn't like the way he said, "the thing." Like it was dangerous. Like it had a name he couldn't say out loud. "Why now?" Ellie asked. "Why show up after all this time?" He looked at her. Really looked. And for a moment, the weight behind his expression landed like thunder. Regret, maybe. Guilt. Or something else. "Because others will come too," he said softly. "People who won't knock." Then he tipped his hat, turned, and walked back into the dark without another word. Ellie didn't sleep that night. She sat in the trailer office long after Denton disappeared into the trees, the porch light humming above her, the letter from Phoenix Division still spread across the desk. Outside, the yard had gone still. Not the kind of stillness that brings peace, but the kind that makes you feel watched. She replayed his words over and over. Others will come too. People who won't knock. He hadn't sounded like a threat. He'd sounded like a man who'd already seen what happened when people got too close to Echo Hawk. By sunrise, Ellie had made up her mind. If they were coming, they weren't going to find a girl curled up and hiding. They'd find a woman who had already decided to finish what her uncle started. She changed into coveralls, tied her hair back, and headed straight for the far corner of the yard. The morning fog clung low to the ground, brushing against her boots as she picked her way through the rows of rusted metal and twisted debris. When she reached the Echo Hawk, it looked even stranger in daylight. Not less mysterious, just more real. Like something waiting to wake up. She brought tools this time. A full set. Bolts, crowbars, gloves, even a floodlight from the shop trailer. She didn't know what she'd find inside, but she was done waiting. Done being careful. Whatever this thing was, her uncle had protected it with his life. She wasn't going to bury it again. She pried open the main panel, unlatched the side access, and ducked her head inside. Dust coated everything. Spiderwebs clung to her shoulders as she leaned in farther. The cockpit, if that's what it was, had 2 seats, both wrapped in cracked leather and fixed to rails. The interior was tighter than she expected, but built with precision. Instrument panels lined the curved walls, though most had been stripped or smashed. Some gauges were labeled in code. Others had no markings at all. She opened a lower hatch near the footwell and found what looked like a black metal core the size of a toaster oven, but etched with a honeycomb pattern that shimmered faintly when the light hit it. It didn't hum, didn't glow, but something about it felt charged, like it remembered being alive. She snapped photos, logged every panel, every switch, labeled wires, cataloged pieces. If someone came looking, she'd have proof. She'd also know what she was dealing with. And maybe she'd be ready to finish it. That night, she set up camp in the trailer office cot. Coffee pot, journal, no phone, no internet. She didn't want outside noise. She wanted answers. She opened Reggie's notebook again and flipped to the last page. A single line was scrawled there, in writing that had clearly been rushed. If she's reading this, she's ready. Show her the hanger. Ellie stared at it. There was no hanger, at least, not that she knew of. But she'd been wrong about a lot of things lately, and it was time to look again this time. Deeper. By the next afternoon, the town had already started whispering. Ellie noticed it first at the gas station, the way old Mr. Klein at the register paused a little longer before handing her change. The way the cashier looked at her boots, still caked in red clay. The same red clay from the back edge of the yard. The same clay that now stained her gloves, her sleeves, her dreams. Later, she stopped at the hardware store for more floodlights. A woman she didn't recognize asked if it was true she'd inherited the whole heap. Ellie nodded once, not offering more. But the woman smiled too curious, too rehearsed, and said, "Heard you were digging up something mighty strange out there." She didn't answer, just paid and left. Back at the yard, the gate was half open. Ellie froze in her tracks. She hadn't left it like that. She never left it like that. She drew the gate shut behind her, heart thudding, scanning the lot as she walked, one hand tightening around the wrench in her back pocket. Nothing looked disturbed at first. The rows were still there, the silence still thick. But when she reached the far corner, the tarp she'd used to recover the Echo Hawk had been peeled halfway back, like someone had stopped mid-search or been interrupted. A fresh boot print sank deep into the soft earth nearby, larger than hers. And recent. She backed up slowly, keeping her breath even. Someone had been here. Someone else knew. That night, she locked the gate with a fresh chain and triple-checked every latch on the trailer. Still, she didn't sleep. Every sound outside made her flinch, a branch tapping the window, a possum knocking over a bucket, the wind rattling the old wrenches strung along the fence. The scrapyard felt different now, like it was, watching her back. In the morning, she returned to Reggie's journal. If there was a hangar, it wasn't on any of the maps she knew. But maybe it hadn't been above ground. She started tracing the foundation lines, the oldest parts of the yard, the power hookups. She walked behind the trailer and past the generator shed, kicking aside leaves and gravel, until she hit something that clinked underfoot. Metal. She dropped to her knees and cleared it with her hands. A hatch, bolted shut, half covered in moss, hidden under years of brush and quiet. She sprinted for tools, breath sharp, hands trembling. When she returned, she worked the bolts loose, one by one, until the hatch gave with a metallic groan and revealed a narrow stairwell below, dark, stale, and lined with poured concrete. A hangar. Reggie had buried it right beneath their feet. She grabbed a flashlight, inhaled once, and descended. The air was thick, untouched, the walls damp. But what lay at the bottom made her stop cold. Not a second Echo Hawk, not parts, blueprints, dozens, rolled and labeled in wax-sealed tubes, stamped, tagged, and in the center of the room a projector, still wired, still humming faintly like it had been waiting years for someone to flip the switch. She did, and the past lit up before her, like a secret that had finally decided to be found. The projector flickered to life with a low whir, casting a square of pale light onto the cement wall. Dust floated in the beam like ghosts rising, dancing in the air of a place long forgotten. Ellie stepped back, arms crossed tight across her chest, bracing herself for whatever her uncle had left behind. The screen lit up with the faded image of Ellie Mae, younger, leaner, eyes sharper than she remembered. He stood in front of the Echo Hawk intact, untouched by rust, wearing a jumpsuit, and the same sideways grin he always wore when working on something no one else believed in. Test log. Echo Hawk 3. August 7th, 1993. His voice crackled. If you're watching this, I'm gone. or I'm in too deep to come back." Ellie froze. Reggie looked straight into the lens, and for a moment, it felt like he was looking directly at her. "You know me as your grease-stained, loud-mouthed uncle. But before that, I was one of 6 mechanics working on a project the government didn't want to finish. Echo Hawk was never supposed to fly. Not because it couldn't, because if it did, everything changed. It was silent, self-powered, adaptive. We weren't fixing combustion, we were replacing it." He paused in the video, glancing over his shoulder. "They shut it down, said it was premature. Too many questions, too many eyes. So I did the only thing I could. I stole it." Ellie gasped softly. "I had help. Denton mostly. A few others. But I hid it here because I didn't trust anyone else. I told myself I'd finish it one day once the noise died down. But life, well, life has a way of stealing your time." The screen cut to another video, rougher, handheld. It showed the Echo Hawk rolling through the yard at night, headlights dark, moving on silent wheels toward the far gate. Reggie's voice returned. "I called it the last drive. Never even started the engine. Just rolled her into place, covered her up, and walked away. Thought if I buried her deep enough, they'd forget. And for a while, they did." The video faded, and another log began dated just 2 years before Reggie's death. "I don't know how long I've got," his voice said, weaker now. "The arthritis makes it hard to turn a bolt, but I still dream about it. About what it could have done. About what you might do with it." He leaned into the frame, eyes watery but burning with something fierce. "If this lands in your hands, Ellie girl, don't make it pretty. Make it fly. Make them remember. Make you proud." The recording ended. Silence filled the room like thunder. Ellie sat on the cold floor, the breath knocked out of her by the weight of it all. It wasn't just a machine. It was a message. A mission. A trust passed down like a flame. She stood slowly, legs trembling, and gathered the blueprints. She didn't know how yet, didn't have the funding, the tools, the team, but one thing had changed. She believed, and that was enough to begin. The first spark came 3 weeks later. It wasn't dramatic, no fire, no smoke, no rumbling thunder, just the quiet, electric click of a core system acknowledging power for the first time in decades. But Ellie's hands shook as she watched a row of soft green lights flicker to life on the Echo Hawk's control panel. The team she had assembled was small, mismatched, imperfect, but loyal. There was Pete from the local auto shop who'd once said the yard should be flattened and turned into condos, now elbow deep in custom wiring. Marisol, a retired avionics engineer she'd found through an old message board. And Leo, a high school kid with big dreams and steady hands, who came by after class every day just to learn, just to help. They didn't ask for money. They didn't ask many questions either. They saw something in Ellie, the same spark that had lived in Reggie, and they followed it. Piece by piece, the Echo Hawk came back together. Panels welded, circuits replaced. The experimental flight stabilizers, once just sketched in pencil, now laser cut and fitted by hand. The propulsion core, the mysterious honeycomb-like module, had to be coaxed awake with a custom regulator Pete, built from 2 dehumidifiers and a salvaged Tesla inverter. Some nights, they worked until dawn. Ellie kept Reggie's notebook in her back pocket the whole time, pages marked with grease and determination. Every time she felt overwhelmed, every time she questioned herself, she flipped to that final entry. If she's reading this, she's ready. Avou. By the time the Echo Hawk stood fully assembled under the open sky, her skin sanded smooth, her nameplate reburnished. It looked nothing like a relic. It looked like a revolution, barely disguised in old metal. The morning of the test, the sky was pale and still. No wind, no rain, just silence, like the world was holding its breath. They moved the craft to the old dirt lot behind the yard, where Reggie had once tested rebuilt pickups. Ellie climbed into the cockpit alone, the harness worn but secure. Her heart thumped in her ears. "Ready?" Pete's voice crackled over the radio. Ellie looked out through the curved glass of the canopy. The team stood in a loose line by the shop trailer, half covered in soot, half glowing with hope. She pressed the ignition switch. Nothing, for a second, just silence. Then the propulsion unit hummed low, steady, confident like a giant drawing its first breath. The control panel lit up. Stabilizers calibrated. Navigation ran self-check. A soft tremor vibrated through the cockpit floor. Ellie didn't smile. She gritted her teeth. Focused. Gripped the throttle. Pushed gently. The Echo Hawk lifted 6 inches off the ground and hovered. No wheels, no noise, just flight. The team erupted behind her, shouting, cheering, but Ellie heard none of it. All she could hear was Reggie's voice, quiet and proud. Make it fly, and she had. The news spread faster than she ever imagined. It started with a blurry video Leo posted, the Echo Hawk floating soundlessly in the golden light of evening, framed by pine trees and disbelief. He hadn't meant for it to go viral. He just wanted to prove to his dad that it was real. But within 24 hours, a defense blogger picked it up, then an aerospace forum, then a national tech site. By the end of the week, Ellie's inbox was overflowing with interview requests, business offers, and government contacts wanting to schedule a conversation. She ignored most of them. She wasn't interested in selling a dream that didn't belong to her alone. Instead, she stood at the back of the scrapyard one last time, beneath the same gray sky that had hung over Reggie's funeral, watching the Echo Hawk rest calmly on its launch pad. It looked different now, cleaner, brighter, awake, but not flashy, not over-polished. The kind of machine that carried both legacy and purpose in its welds. The small press conference was her idea. No stage, no spectacle, just a gravel lot, a few reporters, the townsfolk who'd laughed once and now stood silent, and the team who helped her resurrect a ghost. Pete leaned over and whispered, "You ready?" Ellie nodded slowly, her voice low. "I've been ready since the day I opened that hatch." She stepped forward. The crowd quieted. My uncle used to say, "If you're lucky, you don't just fix things, you help them remember what they were meant to be." I think he was talking about more than just engines. She paused, eyes scanning the horizon, then settled on the Echo Hawk. This machine was never meant to be buried, and maybe neither was I. She pressed a small remote. The stabilizers clicked softly. The propulsion unit hummed to life. The Echo Hawk lifted again, smooth and effortless, casting no smoke, no roar, just rising, like it had waited decades for permission. Gasps echoed across the crowd, and then silence. Reverent, holy. A child pointed up and whispered, "It's like magic." But Ellie knew better. It wasn't magic. It was work. It was memory. It was blood and rust and blueprints in the dark. She let it hover for a minute, then slowly guided it down. The landing was soft, final, but not an ending. Later that night, after the press had gone and the tools had been packed away, Ellie sat on the office steps of the trailer, a cup of black coffee in her hands and the stars coming out one by one. Leo stood beside her, arms crossed. "You think Reggie knew this would happen?" he asked quietly. She smiled. "I think he hoped." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the old nameplate, the one she'd removed and polished before the final build. She ran her thumb across the engraving. M. Mae, Project Echo Hawk 3. She stood, walked to the front of the restored ship, and carefully bolted it back into place. Then she stepped back and looked at it. Really looked. Not just at what she'd built, but what she'd become. They'd laughed when she inherited the scrapyard. They weren't laughing now.